Theophilus with the Museum for Magnetic Sound Recording, and we're with Jerry and Nick of Terra Nova Mastering, and we're going to grill them on what mastering's all about. So let me start with Jerry just for a second. Jerry, when did you first get into recorders? And I noticed that you have one sitting over here on the side.
Wow. Well, it's been about 50 years. Back in the mid-1960s, my brother brought home this tape recorder one day and left it with me. He thought he was going to use it in college to record lectures or whatnot, and decided it was too much trouble and just brought it home and left it one day. And we recorded garage bands and pretended we were on the radio and made up skits and this, that, and the other. And I remember at one point the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan's show, and I had the great idea. I thought, well, if I can record that, then I can listen back to it over and over. And so I got fascinated with the technology a long time ago.
That's cool.
About that same time, I got a guitar. You know, after hearing Buddy Holly and the Ventures and then the Beatles, and I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. Some combination of guitars and tape recorders resonates with me.
And this was going on in Lubbock?
A little town outside of Lubbock, Levelland.
Okay.
20 miles west of Lubbock. That's where I grew up.
Oh, Levelland.
There's a great school there. South Plains College has a great audio program.
Right. And
a music program there. Of course, I kept playing guitar, and in garage bands, and studied music in high school and in junior college. But then I bought my first Sound on Sound tape recorder, which was that Akai, and I would experiment with laying down a rhythm track and then laying down a lead track, and that was so much fun, very rewarding. So I majored in music in college, and eventually ended up doing a bachelor's degree in composition, which involved a lot of tape-based composition with early synthesizers, and then I did one extended composition using electric guitar, going through ring modulator. So it's very experimental. The 70s, as you might recall, was a very open-minded, experimental time when it comes to art. Right. Art and music, it was the more adventurous, the better in some ways. So, right. And I remember using an Otari 8-channel machine, half-inch, back in the music studio at Texas Tech, and under a guy named Ronald Pellegrino was our professor, and he was like this Berkeley early laser and synth music guy that's still around, by the way. A really brilliant man. This would have been 78. No, I didn't graduate until 83 or something. Okay. Right. How us musicians are. We join a band, get the road, So I'll finish school later. Yeah. But I eventually did finish and got a master's as well.
Oh, cool.
But all along there was a tape recorder around.
So when you left school, where did you go?
Well, I became a teacher.
Oh, really? Okay.
Down at Midland Junior College, and we offered basic recording classes, state-approved basic recording classes, and we started out with a basic 8-track studio, and then we upgraded to 16. And being a junior college, it was just freshmen and sophomores, so it's very rudimentary level. Like, this is a microphone, this is a tape recorder, here's play, here's record, here's rewind. So here's a VU meter. Try not to put it in the red.
Right.
Yeah, but they have a really nice junior college there, and we had a good program. And then, and I also experimented with MIDI and all that stuff in those years. And then I started hearing about this digital audio stuff and digital signal processing and DSP, and got fascinated with that. I thought, oh, you can take the sound, load it digitally into a computer, manipulate it, do things with it, and spit it back out. And I got truly fascinated with that. A friend of mine, Ron Franklin in Los Angeles, was one of the pioneers in that field in the film and TV industry. He was doing ADR with the digital workstation shortly after they were invented back in the late 80s. So being at the junior college level through the 80s, I came down to Austin to South by Southwest in 1990.
And went.
And this,
never left.
And this, they never left. The light bulb went off, and I thought, you know, there's nobody in Austin that knows anything about mastering. Very little digital technology. DAT tape had just come out, and so Diane, I quit my job at the college, and Diane and I moved here and started Terra Nova in 1990. Bought a workstation and hit the ground running.
That's cool. How about you, Nick? When did you first use a recorder?
My first recorder I used was actually Windows 95 sound recorder.
Wow, okay.
We had this computer in our family computer that we got to use, and I heard someone tell me at school one day that race car was the same forwards as it was backwards. And I didn't know at the time they were talking about palindromes that the letters were all right, so the way I figured out how to test that was to open up the sound recorder, record me saying race car, and there was a function in there to reverse the sound. And I said, that doesn't sound anything like race car backwards.
That's good.
So that was really my first thing that I ever recorded myself, was playing around with a little Windows 95.
Cool.
It was a Gateway PC or something cheesy like that.
Gateway.
Yeah, and it was just the way my mind thought. I was a musician my whole life,
Cool.
but ended up finding out that I had a knack for the recording stuff in college, and I wasn't going to make a living playing guitar. So.
Right. So you came to Terra Nova as an intern, I think I understood.
I did. I started in '95 and was hired on full time July 11th.
Wow, I didn't realize it had been that long.
2005.
2005, right, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was confused with Windows 95.
Yeah.
I got it.
My first experience with analog tape was an extracurricular activity that Bobby Arnold had. He was in charge of the studio at the SRT program at Texas State, and was contacted by the LBJ library, the library there on the Texas State campus.
Right.
But they had reels of audio tape that they needed digitized for their archive, and Bobby was looking for a volunteer to do that, so I volunteered, thinking it may be my only chance to get exposure to analog tape, and I ended up getting a bunch of these reels and a little recorder to transfer them into Pro Tools or whatever, and that was my first exposure, and they were all the Bob Wills radio show. So they had the entire catalog of every radio show Bob Wills ever did.
Really?
One particular radio station or whatever, and that's what I did for 2 semesters.
What was the recorder, do you remember?
A Technics or a Pioneer. I remember the Transport.
Right.
It was a tabletop unit. The supply reel came through a tensioner, and then up and then down through a mechanism with a capstan. The tape was on both sides.
Oh, that's like the Technique.
Oh,
Technics. That must have been it, and then back through another tensioner. And
Yeah,
then through the
RS
side.
1520.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one back in the 80s. I didn't know about the Bob Wills tapes. I transferred back in the early 90s. Ray Benson brought over a big box of Bob Wills recordings.
Oh wow.
That I transferred for him. When they did that first, one of those first Bob Wills, all Bob Wills records they did back in the early 90s. You know, it's a lot of obscure versions of this, that, and the other. Some of them from who knows what studio, and so I've done my share of those as well. Yeah, the guy grew up with Bob Wills music, and you know, out in West Texas. It's like usually the old timers in the town, and when they'd get together and play, you know, for early settlers' day, they'd be playing some Western swing.
Right.
And maybe a little hoedown music. So
Yeah.
know the genre very well. One thing that's really interesting, a fellow we worked with a couple of years ago, he had tapes going back into the 50s, and we were doing a big retrospective transfer job that Nick did most of it, and some of the tapes, they played just fine. So we're thinking, well, if you're going to archive something, put it on tape and take care of it, keep it in the house, and rather than in the tool shed. Chances are it's going to last for decades. And we've all had CDRs that have gone bad.
Right.
Or hard drives that have failed.
Right. Or the format changed.
Yes. Yeah, formats changed or that are unreadable later, like the AT drives.
I heard the saying analog ages gracefully and digital ages definitely.
You want to start in Studio A here?
Sure. I love Diane's artwork. This is so cool.
There you go.
Very cool.
Yeah, I need a little bit more acoustical treatment. We built this room from the floor up.
Wow.
Actually, from that linoleum floor. It was just a big empty space, so we framed it out, put in the hardwood floor, and Bill Johnson and Jim Gilbert did the acoustics in here. I got my first tape recorder out for you.
Oh, cool.
It's an Airline I've had since I want to say 1965, with the original Scotch tape, magnetic tape.
Oh, cool.
And my brother gave it to me about that time, and it was got me into this whole mess. Ran at 3 3/4 at the high speed, half track mono, but the rectifier tube's have been broken since the mid 80s, so that's the last time it saw power. And then of course here's the Ampex ATR, ATR 102. That was really the ultimate machine. This one's from the mid 70s, I want to say 76, 77. Some of the parts are dated. Of course, it's been totally rebuilt. David Huff rebuilt it. The audio cards, and it's got many parts from ATR services in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Mike Spitz, the great Mike Spitz, used to consult with us on the machine. It had been in a warehouse for probably 10 years or longer, so it was full of dust, and cobwebs, and pecan shells, and no telling what had been living in there. And so I bought it for a very reasonable price, and back in about 2004.
Okay.
And put David to work on it, and so it's been in use for about 10 years. Pro Tools HD and then Sonic Soundblade. I used 2 workstations in tandem with each other, one to pitch and one to catch.
Right.
And go through all my analog goodies on the way there. Quite often bounce to tape as part of the process, just because people love that sound. Yeah, the old Macintosh power amp. We just had it recapped last summer. It seems like about once every 9 years it needs new caps. ATR 700 here. It's got. I think it was the last machine that was designed by Ampex, and then it was actually built by
TIAC.
And
then they did the ATR 800, and it was over.
Yes. Yeah. And you have to take the bottom panel off to get to the tweaks. In addition to half track, it also has quarter track. Grandma tapes, we can transfer those. And Nick has done tons and tons of transfers of quarter track, quarter inch.
I wondered if you all did that.
We do a lot of formats for every quarter-inch format and any half-inch format.
Yeah, I had an Akai. Back in the early 70s, I had an Akai that had sound on sound, and I used to experiment with that. I'd lay down a guitar rhythm track, and then I'd come back and play a solo on top of it. And other than the little mono recorder in there, sound on sound, it was like a miracle.
Yeah. How did you start working with folks to start developing the mastering services to people? I guess everybody was shipping out to Nashville, LA, or New York.
Right, or A&R in Dallas.
Okay. Oh wow, A&R in Dallas.
Yeah, but they had a lathe and they were cutting sides and we were kind of the new technology, hence Terra Nova, new ground. I had one of the first 3 digital workstations in town. Barbara Kay from Timbuk3 had one, and David Roach. Brilliant David Roach had one, and I think I had the 3rd one in town, and I was the first to start using it commercially. We went through the Austin Musicians Register and got names and addresses, and that day I came down for South by. There was a studio tour, so I went around to all the studios and talked to Wink Tyler at Austin Recording Studio and Stuart Sullivan at Arlen Studios, Bill Munyon over at Music Lane, and Cedar Creek Studios, and Austin Tracks. There's 5 or 6 studios. I went around and talked to him about, the quote new digital workstation technology, and I was thinking of putting in a digital editing and mastering service, and would they be interested in hooking up with us? And everybody was pretty interested. They didn't know much about it, and so I found a niche.
Yes, right.
And so we did a big mass mailing. I went down to the courthouse and filed a DBA, and we started doing seminars. 2 or 3 different. Maybe the Musicians Union was one, and there was an Austin music group, and I'd pack up my workstation and go and set it up, and people would come say, "What's this?" And what are those squiggles on the screen? I say, "Well, that's the waveform of this music." And I'd either have speakers or headphones or both, and I'd show them the editing capabilities, that I could do fade outs and edits and raise level and change equalization and
perfect copies.
Quote perfect copies, and build a playlist, a whole list of songs that would, And before you knew it, we were working with Willie Nelson and Ray Benson and all these wonderful people, and it hooked up with a couple of local labels, Amazing Records. Right. You probably remember Jim Yanaway, and then Antone's Records with Clifford Antone. We were doing a bunch of their stuff, and Watermelon Records, and which was Heinz, and there all through the 90s for the first 10 years, I was probably working on 2 records a day.
Wow.
Working from in the morning till well after midnight. I didn't get much sleep in the 90s, but the great thing was we got to know so many wonderful people. We got to know almost everyone on the scene, and then if somebody was passing through town, like the band Fish, I got to work with them one day back in 1993 when they were still on their way up, as a cult band.
What was the first mastering job you did that went gold?
Johnny Cash, live at Austin City Limits.
Okay. Wow.
Both DVD and surround, and stereo CD, and I think that came out on vinyl as well. Mainly we work on indie label,
right.
So there's not quite as many of them that turn gold or platinum as in the major label world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. When people bring stuff into Terra Nova, I'm going to give Nick here a chance. What formats are you getting most of the time to master from?
These days, mostly just WAV files. People bring them in on disk or flash drive or.
Right. Not multi-track more than any.
Yeah, no, we're a mastering studio, so nothing comes in multi-track. It's always stereo mixes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the mastering process, if you don't mind.
Yeah, there's lots of euphemisms about mastering and sort of what we do. It's sort of like the bridge between the artistic side of making a record and the technical side of distributing that to the public. And we sort of bridge that gap, being both artistic and technical in our approaches and in our education and tools that we use.
Do most clients come participate? Do they stay here?
Yeah, most mastering studios don't always have that, but we encourage it.
Yeah.
And I find that's one thing that's sort of helped us in the Austin scene. Everyone sort of likes to be really hands-on. Everyone likes to be there. It's usually almost always independent artists that are funding it themselves, so they like to be there on every part. They're usually producing their own stuff. So it really makes them feel comfortable when they come in, and your album or your music is a piece of you, and you want to make sure that someone's taking the time to treat it properly and do a good job, not mess it up.
Right.
So we encourage people to come, especially if they haven't worked with us before. It really puts them at ease to come and see the studio and meet us and work on the project together.
One thing that Nick is really good at and that we specialize in are doing mix checks. People, maybe they've mixed it themselves, or maybe they're just not quite sure about their mixes, and so they'll either send to us online or come with their mixes and have us listen and evaluate. And Nick is really good at evaluating mixes and making suggestions like, yes, this is good, but if you were to do this, it would be even better. You know, so helping lesser experienced engineers, you know, people that are mixing themselves in the DIY world to improve their mixes. And even some engineers, you know, you once you've been working on a project for hours and hours and hours and days and weeks, you know, you can lose perspective. So having that neutral third party, you know, we get to hear it for the first time. Right. And so we can give an unbiased, you know, opinion about how it sounds. And Nick's really good at working with people.
I mean, that does take a special skill, because you're dealing with somebody's baby at that point. And I mean, I can imagine that it's very eggshell-ish.
Oh yeah, there's some etiquette involved. Right. Yes, if the artist, the producer, and the label guy are all three in the room, and the engineer, you don't want to say this. You know, this mix is really bad, you know, and you don't want to embarrass anyone. So there's a way to do that.
Good politics.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we try to do with that is be a resource for the engineers and the artists in town, that they know that if they're unsure about something, they can come in and listen on our awesome systems that really sound great in these rooms, that they may not have the capability of having something like that, so they can come in and listen in here, and we can sort of give feedback. And over years and years of working with engineers or artists that are recording themselves or working with other bands, we become a part of their team, and we get lifelong clients that way by developing that repertoire and trust.
Have you turned things away?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't do us any good to have our name on something that's bad, and it doesn't do the artist any good to have their name on something that's bad. Right. So we are kind of the silent gatekeepers of that. We try to be very tactful in how we approach that. That's one thing I learned here that I was not taught in school. My whole brain-mouth filter was non-existent when I started here. And I would just straight up tell people stuff sucks, there's nothing I can do with it, next kind of thing, which did not go very well. And switching that into well, have you thought about this? Did you hear have you heard this in this way before? Is that what you intended? And usually, you know, asking those questions, a lot of times, no, that's not the way we thought it was going to sound, or yeah, we did that on purpose. Right. It's a key part of the genre. Right. You know, stuff like that. I did one of the first bachata bands in America. It's from Los Angeles, and I mastered their EP and a couple singles. And one of the key parts of the genre is this funny DI acoustic guitar with a chorus or something on it that is like, oh man, this is nasty sounding. What's wrong with this? And you know, like, I called the client up and said, this is really funky sounding. Is this what you meant to do? He's like, oh yeah, that's like the quintessential thing, other than, you know, it's usually in Spanish, and it's got these Afro-Cuban sort of beats to it. It's that guitar tone, which is very important to the genre. And, you know, without that phone call and having that dialogue, we wouldn't have known that. Right. But I also learned stuff from talking with engineers.
Yeah, this was our first room we put together, 2002.
And running MCI.
Nick's been working in here since 2005.
Yeah, Sony branded MCI machine. We've got these are the half-inch heads. We've got quarter-inch heads on them. Steve Sadler did the refurb on the electronics drawer in here a couple months ago, and got it all back up into spec. And
from Levin's Audio in Nashville.
Cool. Yeah.
And it's a JH110C, which was the last.
A little extra space here for the big 12-inch reels.
Both quarter-inch and half-inch. So that machine sees a lot of action as well. Runs at 15 and 30 inches per second.
And 7.5.
And 7.5.
Yeah, all
That's
three.
Right, I forget. Yeah.
High, medium, and low. All three choices.
It's a very gentle tape path. You know, you can if you block the optical sensor with a business card, you can spool from one reel to the other without going through the over the heads, which is really nice. Really nice for winding.
Without touching rollers, guides, or heads.
Right. Wow.
And hopefully without breaking old splices, you know, with the splicing tape is dried out, you know.
Yeah, and you can go extra slow with MVC, manual velocity control. You can slow it down slower than fast forward and rewind go. So you can crawl it down real slow and then to a stop.
Right.
And those are John French heads on it. JR. David Huff and Nick have kept this thing, and Bill Johnson, and even Chet Himes have worked on this.
Wow.
Keeping this thing going I've had that one for about 20 years.
That looks like just a killer turntable.
It is.
Microseki.
DDX 1500 or something like that?
1000.
1000.
Nick went to great pains. He completely overhauled it, cleaned all the parts, everything just perfectly aligned, and it sounds awesome. A well-cut piece of vinyl just sounds amazing.
A lot of the same things that are in Jerry's room. The two differences are the GML EQ, which is kind of like the Sontec, similar designers.
George Massenberg.
Same guy. Yep. Avalon 80-2055 EQ, and then the same compressors, the Manley Verimu and the Rupert Neve Master Bus Processor. I've got a custom designed Tilt EQ, this black box here in the middle.
Drew, right?
Yeah, a friend of mine from school, Drew Heaton, helped design that. He was also on the team for the Master Bus Processor, along with Hutch.
Wow.
At Rupert Neve Designs. We got to help with some of the prototype design and troubleshooting and all that sort of stuff with the Master Bus Processor, which was a lot of fun.
We did beta test those, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love your acoustics and your design in here. I mean, it's just a gorgeous room.
Our rooms are very different from each other.
Originally, but Bill and Jimmy fine-tuned it for us. They added some bass traps, and of course you see the RPG diffusers, but I got the fan walls. I got that idea from a Bob Ludwig room.
Jerry, how'd you find Nick?
Well, Nick was a star student down at Texas State University in their sound recording technology program, and I mastered a project that he produced with a jazz saxophone. Yes, yeah, and singer. And so Nick showed up, and we won maybe December, and was it December of 2004 we mastered that?
Might have been November.
Okay. And so we got to know each other, and then a few months went by, and then he wanted to intern with us, and so it was happenstance. And then we had mutual friends at Texas State, Gary Hickenbotham and Barbie Arnold, and the director of the program as well.
Mark.
Yeah, Mark. We've had a really, really great relationship for 10 years.
And your wife also, Diane, with the art.
Thanks. She, we needed a little bit more wall covering in here, and she said, I've got this brilliant idea, and it worked out perfectly because gives some good eye candy, and their musical themes, and of course Diane is the she's our PR person, answers the phone and does the scheduling, and her sister Mary too.
How did she feel about picking up and leaving Midland when you?
Well, originally she's from Houston, and we both have family here, so it was a welcome change. I usually try to do one record a day, maybe 4 or 5 per week, and I think Nick and I each do about 200 to 250 per year, so 4,500 per year.
Okay.
And if you do the math, I think that comes up to about 10,000 records we've been involved in over the last 25 years. So many great artists and people we've gotten to know.
Right.
Some very colorful characters, and that's a big part of it. You know, it's not just music, it's not just records, it's, you know, or the business. It's really about people.
Right. It is.
You know,
I agree.
human expression and
Right.
interactivity, and
Right.
it's to get a little philosophical about it.
Okay.
Somehow I tend to attract lots of songwriters and guitar players, and or people that do both. But you know, it's jazz one day and hip hop the next day and country and folk the next day, and maybe a classical thing from one of the universities the next day, and keeps it interesting.
I was
And
going to say, what a cool place to be doing this.
well, it's a lot of fun. But what comes in the door and what goes out the door, we want it to sound better. Maybe a lot better, maybe just a little bit better, and at least no worse.
Right. Exactly. That's the trick. Yeah, I notice you do have several analog machines around. What are your thoughts about the current debate about analog or digital? Do you all have a feeling either way as far as where that's going?
On one of the audio forums, my signature is that it's not analog versus digital. It's use it all.
Okay.
Use it all for, you know, analog, tape, digital, tubes, transformers, plug-ins, whatever. Use it all. So I have a hybrid approach in mastering. We've got digital workstations, we've got tubes, we've got transformers, we've got discrete analog, we've got tape machines. So we're spanning numerous decades and formats, and so it's, to me, it's inclusive rather than this versus that.
Let each of them shine where their strong points are.
Truly, digital is so convenient.
Right.
You know, file transfer, you know, no generation loss, all the things that it does well. And then analog has that. It's just got that flavor, that character that is so ear friendly.
Who are some of the people that you have worked with, like the main stars over the years?
Oh, wow. Well, I already mentioned Willie Nelson and Ray Benson, and I didn't get to work with Johnny Cash, but I worked on that record, and we've had Chris Christopherson in here, worked on a record for Chris, and just about anybody in the Austin or the Texas scene. It's amazing, you know, the people we've gotten with. Some that are no longer with us, you know. Many that are no longer with us. And so it's fun for us to see a kid show up, and it's his first record, and they're green and so full of enthusiasm, and for us, you know, to help them with that first record, and then they keep coming back for years. You know, we've worked with Johnny Gimbel, and I've worked with Johnny's son Dick Gimbel, and then I've worked with Dick's daughter Emily. Nick's worked with Emily a lot, and so yeah, it's 3 generations. And then we've worked with a number of generations of Willie Nelson's family. In fact, I'm finishing tonight a record of Lukas Nelson, a new record of Lukas Nelson, which is one of his 2 youngest sons. I think Lukas is probably about 25. There's grandchildren and a great grandchild that's actually on one of Willie's that's on a record we've worked on. So it's called Georgia. It's about every time he hears the song Georgia, it reminds him of this girl named Georgia, and whether it's his dad's version that was famous or whether it's Ray Charles' version singing the old song Georgia, well, it's
And this is
this is unreleased.
okay.
This is not released yet. I'm hoping Lucas won't mind if I
Thank you, guys.
But thank you, Martin.
Anything else?
Correct.
We'll have this on the internet tonight. No.
I'll be hearing from Lucas's management.